And where there is struggle, there is suffering. When we suffer, we point outward. We blame circumstances, people, the past, the unfairness of life. But the real weight, the real chain keeping us bound is much closer. It is the unnoticed tension in the mind, the quiet resistance inside the heart, the constant conflict between what is and what we wish it to be. Unhappiness thrives in that gap. The more tightly we hold on to expectations, attachments, fears, and unexamined emotions, the more we ignite our own inner struggle. And where there is struggle, there is suffering. But here is the liberating truth. What was created within can be dissolved within. Unhappiness ends the moment we begin to look inward with honesty, clarity, and discipline. Not by fighting ourselves, not by suppressing emotions, but by understanding them, by meeting reality as it is, not as our mind insists it should be. When you become aware of your inner patterns, when you stop allowing old habits to pilot your life, when you choose presence over reaction, then a shift happens, a lightness emerges, a freedom takes form, and the world which once felt heavy suddenly becomes manageable again. You regain your strength, your confidence, your direction, because happiness was never missing, it was simply hidden beneath layers you can now begin to peel away. Call to action. Starting today, make a promise to yourself. Stop running from discomfort. Stop blaming the outside. Turn your awareness inward. Observe your thoughts and reclaim authority over your inner world. Take one step, even a small one, toward presence, discipline, and clarity. You have the power to end your own unhappiness. Stand up, breathe deeply, and begin the inner work now. Your freedom is waiting. ChatGPT said most unhappiness doesn't come from what happens to us, but from what we allow to grow inside of us. This idea may seem simple, yet it is one of the most profound truths about human experience. Life will always bring challenges, setbacks, disappointments, and unexpected turns, but these external events are not what shape our long-term emotional state. What shapes it is the meaning we attach to them, the stories we repeat in our minds, and the emotional residue we carry. Long-term emotional state. What shapes it is the meaning we attach to them, the stories we repeat in our minds, and the emotional residue we carry. Long-term emotional state. What shapes it is the meaning we attach to them, the stories we repeat in our minds, and the mikkelstamenspo. What shapes it isn't daven alle stories come trubot. After the moment has passed, the real source of unhappiness is the internal environment we cultivate, often without even realizing it. Many people spend their energy trying to control the outer world, adjusting circumstances, avoiding discomfort, changing people, or chasing conditions that promise relief. But even when those external pieces fall into place, the dissatisfaction remains. This is because the root of unhappiness is not the world itself, it is the inner resistance we create. A situation is rarely as heavy as the emotional weight we add to it. A comment from someone else is not as painful as the narrative we build around it. A failure is not as defeating as the judgment we attach to it. In this way, the mind becomes both architect and occupant of its own struggles. Unhappiness grows silently through repetition of unconscious reactions. A small irritation becomes a pattern of frustration. A single fear becomes a habit of avoidance. A moment of insecurity becomes a long-term belief of inadequacy. These internal seeds develop slowly, often starting with minor overlooked moments. Over time they solidify into emotional habits, worrying before anything happens, expecting the worst, replaying old hurts, or clinging to expectations that reality can never fulfill. The inner landscape becomes crowded with tension, and this tension spills into every area of life. If we look closely, we can notice how quickly the mind labels, rewrites, and intensifies experiences. Instead of seeing an event for what it is, the mind adds layers of interpretation. Something inconvenient becomes something unbearable. Something uncertain becomes something threatening. Something imperfect becomes something unacceptable. The unhappiness does not arise from the event itself, but from the amplified emotional and mental resistance that grows around it. This resistance creates a constant internal struggle, and it is this struggle that drains our joy, clarity, and peace. By understanding this mechanism, we begin to see that the true battlefield is internal, not external. The way we react, the beliefs we cling to, and the emotions we refuse to examine all shape our inner condition far more powerfully than the circumstances we face. When we acknowledge this, we reclaim a sense of inner authority. We begin to observe our thoughts instead of obeying them, question our assumptions instead of accepting them, and allow emotions to move through us instead of letting them harden into permanent states. Bit by bit, the grip of unhappiness loosens, not because life becomes easier, but because our inner world becomes clearer and more spacious, allowing room for awareness instead of automatic suffering. The more tightly we hold on to expectations, attachments, fears, and unexamined emotions, the more we create our own inner struggle. This This struggle does not arise suddenly. It is built slowly, through countless moments in which we resist reality instead of meeting it as attachments work in a similar way. We cling to identities, roles, opinions, routines, and outcomes. We hold tightly to the idea of who we are or who we must become, and any deviation from that creates fear. Attachment to comfort keeps us from growth. Attachment to approval keeps us from authenticity. Attachment to certainty keeps us from moving forward. When we attach ourselves to something fragile, our peace becomes fragile as well. Life is in constant motion, and whatever we cling to will eventually shift, break, or disappear. The suffering comes not from the change but from our refusal to adapt with it. Fears too shape unhappiness by shrinking our sense of possibility. Many fears do not even stem from real danger. They come from imagined futures, unhealed memories, or assumptions we've never questioned. The mind creates scenarios that have not happened, and most of them never will. Yet we suffer as though they are already real. Fear controls our choices, influences our relationships, and limits our growth. The more we fear losing something, the more tightly we cling to it, and the cycle continues. Fear feeds attachment, and attachment feeds fear. Unexamined emotions are perhaps the most powerful contributors to inner struggle. Instead of facing the sadness, anger, insecurity, or disappointment that arises, we suppress it or disguise it with distractions. Processed emotions do not disappear, they accumulate. They show up as irritability, restlessness, anxiety, or emotional numbness. When we avoid sitting with these emotions, they tighten their grip on us. The mind becomes a container of unresolved tension, and we carry this into every interaction, every decision, and every quiet moment. This accumulation of expectations, attachments, fears, and unexamined emotions creates a constant background noise in the mind, a subtle resistance that drains energy, makes us reactive, and clouds clarity. It becomes difficult to experience joy when the mind is busy negotiating with reality. It becomes difficult to feel peaceful when we are entangled in imagined outcomes, and it becomes difficult to grow when we are busy protecting ourselves from discomfort. Freedom begins when we recognize this inner struggle for what it is, a pattern we have participated in, often unconsciously. The moment we notice it, we create a small space between ourselves and the pattern. In that space we can breathe, we can observe, we can understand, and understanding softens the grip of the mind's habits, allowing life to be experienced with more openness, fluidity, and presence. When you become aware of your inner patterns, a profound shift begins to take place, one that can quietly transform the quality of every moment in your life. Awareness is not simply noticing thoughts or emotions, it is the deliberate act of observing without judgment, without immediately reacting, and without allowing habitual responses to dictate behavior. Most people move through life on autopilot, driven by conditioning, past experiences, and unconscious habits. These patterns shape reactions, decisions, and even perceptions of reality. The challenge is that these patterns often operate beneath conscious awareness, subtly influencing choices and creating recurring cycles of stress, dissatisfaction, or self-sabotage. Becoming aware is the first step toward reclaiming agency over your mind and your emotional state. Inner patterns are formed through repetition. Early experiences, cultural conditioning, and personal history create mental and emotional grooves that guide behavior. When certain triggers arise, criticism, loss, uncertainty, or rejection, the mind automatically reacts according to these pre-established pathways. Without awareness, these reactions feel inevitable, as though the external event itself has caused suffering. Yet when we pay attention, we see that suffering is amplified by our automatic response, not the event itself. Awareness illuminates these patterns, revealing how fear, expectation, or attachment repeatedly shape emotional responses. This understanding allows us to approach situations with clarity rather than being swept along by habitual impulses. Awareness also fosters choice. Once a pattern is visible, it can be examined, questioned, and transformed. For example, if criticism triggers anger, awareness allows you to pause before reacting, to notice the habitual escalation, and to choose a response aligned with wisdom rather than habit. If disappointment triggers self-doubt, awareness creates the space to separate fact from narrative, to recognize the old story playing in the mind, and to respond with insight rather than compulsion. This ability to observe and intervene interrupts cycles of unhappiness and frees energy that would otherwise be consumed by automatic reactions. It shifts the focus from fighting against life to understanding life as it is. The process of becoming aware also deepens presence. When attention is trained on the inner world, thoughts, emotions, bodily sensations, and habitual tendencies, life is experienced more fully. Small moments, previously overlooked, gain clarity. Emotions are experienced without judgment or suppression. Even discomfort becomes a teacher rather than a tormentor. This presence creates a sense of spaciousness within, reducing the pressure of external circumstances and cultivating resilience. Awareness dissolves the illusion that life's challenges are personal attacks or insurmountable obstacles. It reveals them as natural events that can be met with composure and discernment. Inner patterns often hold hidden narratives about identity, control, and fear. Awareness brings these narratives to light, allowing the mind to interrogate them. Who am I if this does not define me? What if I release this attachment? What is the truth beyond my fear? Each question loosens the grip of unconscious habit and expands the range of possible responses. Awareness does not eliminate challenges or uncomfortable emotions, but it transforms the way they are experienced, shifting the mind from resistance to engagement, from reactivity to presence, and from unconscious suffering to conscious living. Through this process, awareness becomes a tool not just for understanding, but for liberation, as the patterns that once controlled the mind are no longer hidden, and the individual begins to navigate life with clarity, balance, and self-mastery. ChatGPT said, "When we stop allowing old habits to pilot our lives, we step into a space of true freedom, a space where conscious choice replaces automatic reaction." Most people live under the subtle control of habits formed over years, often decades, of repeated thoughts, emotional responses, and conditioned behaviors. These habits create a sense of predictability, which feels safe, but they also limit our potential, keeping us trapped in repetitive cycles of fear, attachment, expectation, and resistance. The mind, trained to rely on these habitual patterns, often interprets them as reality itself, leading us to believe that our reactions are unavoidable, that our suffering is inevitable, and that life unfolds according to forces beyond our control. Breaking free from this internal autopilot requires not just awareness, but deliberate intervention, choosing to act from clarity rather than compulsion. Old habits are like invisible scripts running behind the scenes. They influence how we speak, how we react to stress, how we relate to others, and even how we interpret success and failure. For example, someone conditioned to equate self-worth with achievement may automatically feel anxious or inadequate whenever a goal is delayed or denied. Another person who habitually seeks external validation may react with insecurity or defensiveness whenever their efforts go unnoticed. These scripts are not inherently visible. They operate silently, shaping our perception of reality. When we stop following them blindly, we begin to reclaim the authorship of our own lives. The first step is noticing the pattern, recognizing the familiar reactions that arise in predictable situations, the recurring narratives in the mind, and the habitual emotions that dominate responses. Awareness illuminates the script, but stopping its automatic execution requires conscious effort and practice. Replacing old habits with intentional action does not mean suppressing impulses or denying emotions. Rather, it involves choosing responses aligned with presence, clarity, and understanding. When anger arises, for example, instead of reacting impulsively, one can pause, observe the physical sensations and underlying thoughts, and decide whether the habitual response serves a higher purpose or simply perpetuates suffering. When fear appears, instead of retreating automatically, one can acknowledge it, explore its origin, and choose action guided by reason and courage rather than opportunities to practice discernment. Setbacks become lessons in adaptability, and discomfort becomes a teacher rather than impulsion. Each conscious choice gradually weakens the grip of the old habit, rewiring the mind toward patterns that support freedom, stability, and resilience. Over time, the momentum of these intentional actions begins to outweigh the pull of unconscious repetition. This process also transforms the perception of life itself. When old habits no longer dictate behavior, experiences are encountered with freshness and openness rather than preconception. Challenges become opportunities to practice discernment. Setbacks become lessons in adaptability, and discomfort becomes a teacher rather than a source of automatic suffering. The mind becomes a responsive instrument rather than a reactive machine, capable of engaging fully with reality without being trapped by fear, attachment, or expectation. The liberation that comes from stopping old habits does not erase difficulties, but it allows life to be met with equanimity, clarity, and strength. As old patterns lose their control, the space created allows for creativity, growth, and authentic expression. Choices are no longer dictated by past conditioning or ingrained fear, but arise from insight and conscious intention. Relationships shift because reactions are no longer automatic and interactions are shaped by presence and understanding rather than compulsion. Emotional life becomes more stable because the habitual amplification of negative patterns is interrupted. In essence, ceasing to let old habits pilot the mind opens the door to a life lived with awareness, responsibility, and freedom, in which the individual actively shapes experience rather than being shaped by it, discovering a depth of clarity and empowerment that was previously inaccessible. Understanding reality as it is, rather than as our minds insist it should be, is one of the most profound steps toward ending unhappiness. Most of human suffering arises not from life itself, but from the endless negotiation the mind attempts with reality. We create expectations, form judgments, and construct narratives about how things ought to be, and when reality inevitably deviates from these mental projections, frustration, disappointment, and resistance arise. This inner conflict is subtle yet powerful, shaping emotional responses and influencing decisions in ways that often go unnoticed. The mind believes it is protecting us by resisting the way things are, but in reality, this resistance magnifies discomfort, fuels anxiety, and clouds clarity. Recognizing the difference between what is and what the mind demands is crucial for liberation. The process begins with observation and acceptance. Acceptance is not passive resignation, it is the conscious acknowledgement of reality as it exists in the present moment, without the overlay of judgment, expectation, or wishful thinking. When a situation is observed clearly, without distortion, the mind ceases to manufacture unnecessary suffering. A mistake at work, a difficult relationship, or a sudden change in circumstance no longer triggers the automatic chain of frustration, regret, or blame. Instead, clarity arises, allowing decisions and actions to be based on what is truly present rather than on imagined versions of how life should unfold. This shift in perception creates a profound sense of spaciousness in the mind, reducing the pressure of resistance and opening the door to intelligent, deliberate action. Understanding reality also involves recognizing the impermanent and interconnected nature of all things. Circumstances, emotions, and even personal identity are in constant flux. The mind struggles when it attempts to fix or cling to what is inherently transient. By observing the flow of life without attempting to halt it or distort it, the individual begins to experience events with less emotional turbulence. Disappointment loses its intensity, anger softens, and fear diminishes because these emotions are no longer fueled by the illusion of permanence or control. The mind begins to distinguish between the raw facts of experience and the stories it spins around those facts, and this distinction is transformative. The more clearly reality is seen, the less power habitual mental resistance has over emotional life. Furthermore, seeing reality as it is fosters wisdom and adaptability. When the mind stops insisting on its own way, it becomes capable of responding flexibly to changing circumstances. Challenges are approached with discernment, solutions are sought with creativity, and setbacks are met with resilience rather than panic. This clarity allows the individual to act from presence rather than from reaction, to engage fully with each moment, and to respond appropriately rather than habitually. Life, once perceived as chaotic or oppressive, begins to be understood as a dynamic process in which one can participate consciously. Emotional energy that was previously consumed by resistance is now available for constructive thought, meaningful action, and deep engagement with life. This understanding also cultivates inner peace. By aligning perception with reality, the mind ceases to generate internal conflict. Suffering that arises from wishing things were different diminishes because reality no longer encounters resistance. Experiences are neither amplified nor diminished by mental distortion. They are seen and met directly. As this clarity deepens, a quiet confidence emerges, an assurance that no matter what occurs, one has the capacity to face it with presence, insight, and composure. The transformation is subtle yet profound. Unhappiness, which once seemed inevitable, loses its grip, not because circumstances have changed, but because the mind has learned to meet reality without distortion, judgment, or unnecessary struggle. When you choose presence over reaction, a remarkable transformation, instruction, one from Pakaut, with this isn't das comments, woman you choose presence over reaction, a remarkable transformation despite as Paris, an inner trinitz and farge over reaction, you chiptuman type to deepen dislike tanthelj, and in your baktitsek, begins to unfold within the mind and heart. Presence is the conscious decision to inhabit the current moment fully, without being hijacked by past regrets or future anxieties. Reaction, by contrast, is the habitual automatic response that arises from conditioning, fear, and attachment, often without conscious awareness. Most people live the majority of their lives reacting rather than being present, responding to situations, people, and challenges with patterns ingrained over years. These automatic reactions are often driven by unresolved emotions, ingrained beliefs, or unexamined assumptions, and while they may feel natural, they frequently generate stress, conflict, and unhappiness. By choosing presence, we interrupt these cycles and create a space in which clarity, balance, and conscious decision-making can emerge. Presence requires awareness of the body, mind, and emotions as they arise moment by moment. It involves observing sensations, thoughts, and feelings without immediately labeling them as good or bad, without judgment, and without acting impulsively. When a difficult emotion surfaces, anger, fear, sadness, or frustration, presence allows us to notice it, understand its origin, and respond thoughtfully, rather than reacting impulsively. This does not mean suppressing or denying the emotion, but rather acknowledging it fully, understanding its context, and choosing a response that aligns with wisdom and intention. Over time, this practice weakens the habitual patterns that previously dictated behavior, replacing reactive impulses with deliberate, conscious action. Choosing presence also changes the way we perceive challenges and adversity. Without presence, obstacles feel overwhelming because the mind magnifies them through worry, resistance, and mental chatter. When present, however, each challenge is approached as it is, moment by moment, without the distortion of fear or anticipation. This allows the individual to respond more actively, to assess situations with clarity, and to take actions grounded in reality rather than in mental projections. The emotional intensity that once accompanied difficulties diminishes, and energy previously spent on resisting circumstances is redirected toward practical solutions, insight, and growth. Moreover, presence fosters a deeper connection with life itself. By remaining fully attentive to the moment, even ordinary experiences become rich with awareness and meaning. Conversations are more genuine, interactions are more attentive, and relationships deepen because engagement is no longer clouded by distraction or preconception. The mind is no longer scattered between the past and the future, and emotional responses are no longer dominated by habit. This focus cultivates a sense of calm, stability, and centeredness, allowing joy, gratitude, and peace to arise naturally without dependence on external conditions. Practicing presence consistently requires discipline and patience. The mind is trained over years to react automatically, so lapses are inevitable. What matters is the act of returning to awareness again and again, noticing when reaction arises, and gently redirecting attention back to the present moment. Each return strengthens the capacity for conscious choice, gradually reshaping the mind and emotional patterns. In this way, presence is both a practice and a state of being. It is cultivated through deliberate effort, but manifests as a natural way of living, in which actions flow from clarity rather than compulsion, and life is experienced with depth, authenticity, and resilience. Choosing presence transforms not only how we navigate challenges, but also how we experience the entirety of existence, creating an inner environment where unhappiness can no longer take root.